This is going to be a review of lecture exam 3, which deals with the nervous system, central nervous system, peripheral nervous system, chapter 17, which deals with ascending and descending pathways, eye and ear, autonomic nervous system, and drawing reflex arcs. You can record, and I'm also recording. It's okay. There are 100 points, and it will be graded out of 95, which means 5% extra credit. If you have not already looked at your eye and ear quiz, I have an answer key for that. I can't remember if I gave that one back to you or I just did the answer key.
I think we have that.
For office hours, people, I think I gave it to you.
The questions that you projected, we don't have those.
Correct. Those you don't have, but you have the written one, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So the written one is very helpful, and there will be matching section again of structures of the eye and ear with also what they do. Very similar to what you saw in your homework packet, which was very similar to what was on the quiz. You will also have a matching section for parts of the brain and what it does. For example, parietal lobe, frontal lobe, pons, basal nuclei, also known as basal ganglia, but that's a misnomer, cerebellum, thalamus, occipital lobe, medulla oblongata, epithalamus, temporal lobe, limbic system, insula, cerebrum, midbrain, and hypothalamus. You should know characteristics of those parts of the brain. For example, where would you find the pre- and post-central gyrus? What is important about those two structures? What do we find there? When it comes to a homunculus, what does the size of the body part represent? Remember, there is a homunculus on both the pre- and post-central gyrus. It's not an actual little person, but the drawing of the body represents parts that are innervated by those regions. You should review also the Intro to the Nervous System lecture, and you should know your support cells, like oligodendrocyte, satellite cells, neurolemmacytes, which are also known as Schwann cells, ependymal cells, astrocytes, and microglia. You should also know the structural ways we can identify neurons, like bipolar, multipolar, unipolar. Unipolar is sometimes also called pseudo-unipolar. You should also know functional characteristics of neurons, like afferent and efferent. You should know the parts of the neuron and what they would do, like dendrites, axon, terminal bouton, soma, axon hillock. You definitely need to know your pathways. I will give you the structures and you have to put them in order. So I give you the answer choices, you put them in order. I don't necessarily have to put every single step of the pathway. I can have some omitted. You still should be able to put what is given to you in the correct order.
So like the pathways that we did in the homework, the
So
tier and the
tier, pathway of light, pathway of cerebral spinal fluid, pathway for sound, pathway, yeah. Did I get them all? Tier, CSF, hearing, sight, yeah, that's light. I think I got them all. You will need to buff up a little bit on your cranial nerves. You should know the types of damage that can cause failure of those cranial nerves, like tic de roo seem to get a lot of you all.
Yeah, that was Stevie next one.
Duller.
What was that? That one was the face one, but we did the wrong face one. We did
Duller is
7 instead of 5.
another word for pain.
Now we know it's less.
So duller is actually part of the inflammation pathway. So tic duller is in that term. So it has to do with facial pain, and that is cranial nerve 5.
Is that the suicide?
I'm sorry?
Is that the suicide? Like if you have that injury?
People kill themselves?
Yeah.
The
so
temporal
that-
mandibular joint is, a very painful joint when it starts to erode, and it would be cranial nerve 5 that would innervate that. But people who have a certain disorder of their TMJ, where it's a genetic issue and it starts to erode, they have a high suicide rate because of the pain.
There's nothing they could do? They can't, like, separate or...
Now I'm sure that there are surgeries, but it's like a bone degeneration. It's no good. You should know these following types of words and be able to match them to descriptions like somatic motor neuron, somatic sensory neuron, visceral motor neuron, visceral sensory neuron. And we played that game. There was a little whiteboard chalk that we had. If I say visceral, you all think what? Involuntary, right? Or not aware, right? If I say somatic, then you say aware or voluntary, right? So also I ask you to compare and contrast the following kinds of nervous systems, like sympathetic, parasympathetic versus somatic. Somatic, remember, somatic motor system would be innervating your voluntary effectors, which is skeletal muscle. The other two divisions, sympathetic and parasympathetic, innervate your involuntary effectors. There is a chart in your homework packet where I ask you to fill in for sympathetic and parasympathetic where you find the preganglionic cell bodies, where do you find the postganglionic cell bodies, what neurotransmitter is released by each neuron for both divisions, and you should know what they innervate specifically. Sympathetic is slightly different than parasympathetic. Has a little bit longer list of what it innervates. And you should definitely know the effect of each division on eye, heart, lungs, and gut. As far as chapter 17 goes, your homework packet has a lot more questions in it than what I go for on the test. When you study chapter 17, the only two pathways I am concerned about, the only two, is cortical spinal and the spinothalamic pathway, which is also known as the anterolateral. I don't like anterolateral. I don't think it really tells me anything, but spinothalamic does. Spinothalamic tells you right there it's an ascending pathway, which means sensory. Because the first word tells you where it originates, The second word tells you where it's trying to get to. Spinothalamic. We're going up. So that's sensory. Corticospinal. Cortex to the spine. It's a descending pathway. That's going to be a motor output. So those are the only two. I would know which one also has a like an upper motor neuron versus lower. What has a primary, secondary, and a tertiary. I mean, upper motor, right there. That's a dead giveaway. Which pathway it is? Descending pathways or motor. I do ask questions on reflex arcs. I ask questions in the scantron part. I also ask you to draw certain reflexes. So as far as in the scantron part, but when I don't ask you to draw, is the crossed extensor or withdrawal. So I ask questions on it in the scantron, but you are not expected to draw that one. Now the others that are fair game, and of course there's more than one test version, but you should be able to draw the pathway to target the heart. How would you draw targeting the heart to lower heart rate? How would you draw targeting the heart to increase heart rate? And when we're talking about changing heart rate, this is part of a reflex arc that I asked you to know about back in Unit 2 with the baroreceptors. So how would you draw the afferent fibers coming off of the heart going to the brain? And what part of the brain would they be signaling to?
Would we start at the baroreceptors?
Mm-hmm. So very similar to in your homework packet, there's step-by-step parts to these pathways. So I break down the points. It won't be an all or none type of thing as long as you try and address all of the parts that I give you. So again, like in your homework packet, I break things down. Another reflex arc that you should be ready to know, again, would be targeting the gut, let's say. That was also in your homework packet, if I remember correctly. How would you increase gut motility? How would you decrease gut motility? And if it comes down to increasing gut motility, there's a part where you no longer are using cranial nerve 10 and its postganglionic partner. There's a point where you would need to use a different picture because you would be using parasympathetic sacral equivalents, S2, S3, S4. So be mindful where I ask you to increase the gut or decrease. Remember, if it is anything after which colon flexure left, you would be using those parasympathetic sacral equivalents. You should also know your knee-jerk reflex arc. And I believe there are questions that go with that in your homework packet as well.
Questions? Thank you.
So one of each of these, or just we pick from these?
You won't be able to pick. I pick for you.
Yeah, but it would be like one of each of these.
I would know every single one I just gave you.
I think that's how she's gonna make our test versions for
Different versions.
different versions, gonna have a different reflex.
I'm sorry,
I'll
what?
take the knee-jerk reflex.
Well, I can assure you, all of you will have the knee-jerk reflex arc. I can assure you of that. And I can assure you, in one way or another, you should still know your sympathetic and parasympathetic pathways for eye, heart, lungs, gut. You should. That's all I have. If you have questions.
Look at Dawn, because you know has a question.
We're just waiting for you.
I'm sure I'll get
questions now
quite a
she's
few of
done.
them over the weekend.
Yeah, there'll probably be more.
You don't have any right now?
I'm just trying to see how the picture of the test. So each test will have to do like 3 drawings for
Yes.
each of us? Okay. That's just what I was asking, just for
Yep.
time's sake.
There are, when it comes to the drawings, it has 9 points for the drawings.
Okay. Will there be like a template of something of like the spinal nerve?
Yes,
Perfect.
so I give you, like in your homework packet, I gave you pictures of the gut, I gave you pictures of the heart for you to practice your afferent. I give you the sympathetic transverse section of the spinal cord with the sympathetic trunk. So I give you pictures that you have seen in your homework packet. There's also another picture that you might have seen in the PowerPoint that shows you a transverse section. I don't know if it's in your homework packet or not.
I haven't, let me find it. One page fell out.
These tiny pages.
I know, yeah.
Yeah, it is in your homework packet. This one, that picture. So the pictures I give you in your homework packet, those are gonna be the pictures I use on the exam. So you're familiar with them, you've seen them, you've had to manipulate them and draw on them already in your homework packet. It really should not be any surprises. The homework packets are there to guide you, and if you haven't figured it out already, significant amounts of questions come straight from the homework packet. So now's the time to get that clue if you haven't figured that out yet.
So then, so the written portion of the test, this is the drawing?
It's just the drawing. So
And then,
9 points. That means if you choose not to do any of those drawings and you get everything else correct, you could still get an A on the test. So I would like to think you're not going to leave them blank, that you should at least try. There is a joke. There's a joke that goes, a priest kept praying and praying and praying that he would win the lottery because he needed money for repairs for the church. Kept praying, please let me win the lottery. Finally, in his prayers, God talked to him and said, it would help if you bought a lottery ticket. So if you leave something blank, most certainly you're not going to get points. You got to try to get at least partial credit.
And there's a word spell?
There is not.
No word spell.
There is not a word
One
spell.
older lady wants to tell me, God helps those who help themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Got to buy the lottery ticket if you want to win the lottery. Got to do the drawing if you want partial credit at least. Any other questions? No? Okay. Another test in a week.
Thank you.